The Council of the Varn was convened in silence. Suspended over the glacial rings of Fartun, the Elder Chamber loomed like a silent cathedral in the void. Its walls pulsed with bioluminescent veins of knowledge, organic circuits wired directly into the nervous systems of the 11 attending species. Each elder had served for centuries, guided by laws codified before humanity had even tamed fire. And yet, across all that time, never had a species appeared quite like the Terrans. High Elder Crawl of the Varn extended his frilled appendage toward the center node. A sphere of memory ink hovered into being, displaying fragments from 1,000 intercepted transmissions. Most were noise, some were strange rituals of consumption and conquest, but a few, a very specific few, showed the Terran propensity for destruction with a precision that baffled the most ancient minds. Explosions. Fire and thunder harnessed again and again, not by accident, not by catastrophe, but by intent, controlled, directed, refined. "It is not chaos as we know it," croaked Elder Halvek of the Dredgy. "It is rhythmic, patterned." "They repeat it with confidence," murmured the crystalline interpreter of the Malax, "even in celebration." Krall's frills stiffened. They weaponize instability, detonation as a form of propulsion, collapse used as signal, implosion to shape reality. A moment of reverent silence followed. The newest recordings were from Sigma Prime, an outpost world under Dredgy stewardship, until it was. The Terrans had taken it in a campaign that lasted 36 hours. They used explosives not only to attack, but to reshape terrain, collapse enemy bunkers, reroute energy lines, and create artificial weather disruptions. Their strike teams moved through chaos like it was mapped terrain. It was inconceivable. To most galactic species, explosion was failure, a containment breach, a collapsed engine, the sign of death, of error, of entropy unrestrained. Whole doctrines of science and war were built around prevention. The very idea of setting off a controlled detonation was profane. Yet the Terrans had entire disciplines dedicated to it: chemistry, engineering, ballistics, pyrotechnics, nuclear physics. And they taught it to their children. On Earth, the dawn cracked over a Pacific horizon painted in gold and ash. General Imani Cade stood at the observation deck of Black Ridge Command, sipping coffee as a carrier drone lifted into the stratosphere. Below, a new test range sprawled across what had once been Northern California, now designated Zone Kilo 9. Her lead engineer, Dr. Elijah Trent, paced nervously behind her. His eyes were bloodshot, his palms streaked with carbon. "We're clear for detonation, ma'am. Project Echo 9 is armed. Charge integrity is at 97%. Radiation buffers. Sealed AI kill switches in place. No autonomous overrides this time." "Good." She took another slow sip, watching the skies darken as storm drone clusters repositioned to simulate alien atmospheric conditions. "Fire it." Trent nodded, eyes twitching toward the countdown interface. At 0, the world did not explode, it transformed. The detonation was silent in the vacuum dome, but the visual bloom was staggering, a double-burst shockwave designed to mirror how plasma charges might react in Varnite gravitic fields. The goal was to mimic the enemy's own technology, then break it using Terran brute logic. Where others revered stability, humanity bent chaos to purpose. Cade watched the aftermath with the unshakable calm of a soldier who knew exactly what she was doing. Earth was no longer fighting for survival. They were preparing to shape the rules of war. Behind her, Trent spoke with a voice half prayer, half wonder. "They're never going to understand this." "They don't have to," she replied. "They just have to fear it." In orbit above Mars, the Varn observer pod disintegrated in a blinding blossom of tactical light. Human forces had traced its signal emissions, triangulated its orbital position, and launched a 6-stage kinetic package that reached its target faster than any Varnite could have conceived possible. There were no warnings, no declarations of war. The humans didn't think in cycles. They thought in cracks, bursts, flares. They moved like their weapons, fast, volatile, impossible to track. The Galactic Concord issued a formal protest. Earth's representatives never responded, not with words. Their next message came via the moons of Altari IX, where an entire alien fleet found its engines disassembled mid-flight by high-orbit saboteurs using shaped charges so precisely placed they left no residue. The aliens called it madness. Humans called it engineering. Sergeant Victor Aaron had grown up around explosions. His father was a mining foreman. His mother taught structural demolition at a technical college in Free Texas. He could measure blast radius in his head better than most AI systems could with models. But even he wasn't prepared for the weapon they'd just recovered. He crouched behind a slab of shattered duracrete, eyeing the alien device with a frown. "You're telling me this thing detonates if it experiences silence?" he asked his partner. Lieutenant Reyes nodded, sweat streaking her soot-caked face. "Malek's resonance core keeps its balance through harmonic feedback. If it drops below 12 decibels, it destabilizes." Victor stared at her, "So it explodes if it gets too quiet." She grinned through the chaos. "We've entered an opera playlist, max volume, full bass." Somewhere overhead, an aria thundered from an orbital speaker rig, holding the alien bomb in delicate stasis. Victor laughed, not because it was funny, because it was insane. Human solutions to alien problems. You didn't fight entropy by resisting it, you threw a party and danced with it. Back in the Council of the Varn, the chamber shivered with apprehension. "Their civilization dances on the edge of fire," hissed Halvek. "And does not fall," Krull finished. "They will fall eventually," argued the Shatter Elder, spined and glittering with fear. "No species can survive long in the mouth of chaos." Krull turned slowly, his voice like glass dragging across stone. "They are not in the mouth of chaos. They are learning to control its bite." The Fartun archives received a new data packet, encrypted, marked Priority 1 by the Watchers Guild. The transmission, intercepted from a forward dredgy vessel near the Scutum Void, displayed something previously thought myth. A detonation had occurred, no, several, precisely staged across an asteroid field orbiting a collapsing star. Not for war, not for destruction, but for mapping gravitational distortions in real time. The Terrans had laced the rocks with synchronized charges, creating artificial shockwaves to pulse across spacetime. The pattern revealed eddies, wormholes, fold currents, and they mapped it all live, broadcasting through neutrino tunnels to ships waiting 3 systems away. For most races, such data took centuries to compile. Humanity extracted it with fire and thunder, and they did it in hours. The dredgy captain's final report was jittered with static, his voice strained. "They are rewriting exploration with shaped violence. What we feared they would burn, they now use to illuminate. This is not conquest, this is reinvention." Over Terra Nova, the first human-colonized exoplanet in disputed galactic space, orbital defense arrays sparked to life as an armada emerged from fold space. Shatter warbarges, gleaming like obsidian knives, bristling with particle lances, their arrival had not been provoked. Not yet. Humanity had grown too quickly. It was not their territory that threatened, but their audacity. On the surface, Governor Alia Rahman stood in the under-horizon dawn, eyes fixed on the flashing clouds above. Around her, civilian shelters had already gone dark. Automated defenses were locked in a posture of silence. But they weren't offline. They were listening. Alia spoke to no one in particular. "Give them the sound of peace." The sky began to hum. Low, pulsing frequencies rolled across the plains, subsonic basswaves built to match the vibrational logic of shatter sensor netting. Not language, not music. A code. A sequence the shatter would recognize, resonance-based invitation. It was the Terran form of diplomacy now, not through emissaries, through harmonics, through engineered chaos disguised as order. The shatter scanned. The pulses destabilized their forward sensor bloom, an effect the Terrans had predicted. Instead of attacking, the shatter held, curious, calculating. Then came the counterstrike, not from space, from the mantle below. Human tunneling rigs, having spent months drilling, detonated microflares beneath the outcroppings where enemy scanners were anchored. The quakes were artificial, but not destructive. They shifted crystal alignments just enough to refract shatter signal pulses into fragments. The Armada's targeting systems glitched, their telemetry rebounded into false echoes. They were blind. Terran war doctrine had evolved, not into brute force but surgical destabilization. Use the enemy's assumptions against them. Let them seek order, then show them that control was only an illusion. Alia gave the command, not for an attack, for a transmission. "Send them the recording from the Leviathan test. Let them see what we did with the Cradle core." That was the real deterrent. Leviathan had been a gas giant, uninhabited, inhospitable. Humanity had cracked its magnetosphere using chain detonations over its poles, synchronized to trigger quantum shear inside the planet's core. The resulting pulse created a stable gravitic well, turning Leviathan into a slingshot capable of folding mass across parsecs without the need for gate arrays. No other race had done such a thing. Because no other race would try. The Shatter Armada disengaged 2 hours later. They hadn't been defeated, they had been outthought, outplayed, and outpaced. In the Varn Council, a new term had begun to circulate among the inner circles, whispered, half-admitted. The detonations epoch. It was a heresy of thought that perhaps chaos could become structure. That explosion might be the foundation, not the failure, to suggest it was sacrilege, but still the term spread. The Terrans had not meant to start a revolution of thought. They simply had no reverence for stillness, no worship of balance. From their earliest myths, creation came with fire. The universe had begun in an explosion, and they had never stopped trying to understand it. Elder Malvith of the Ori, a race of beings who communicated through scent and mathematical radiation, voiced what none wanted to admit. If they do not destroy themselves, they will redefine physics for us all. Kral was silent for a long moment. Then we must prepare not to stop them, but to follow. In the belt near Vila 327, a human privateer vessel named Stygian Burn was locked in a dance of death with a dredgy scout cutter. They should have been evenly matched, agility versus firepower. But the Burn fought differently. Captain Sarai Njagu barked orders that had nothing to do with evasion. Instead, she called for the internal venting of plasma lines into hull-side channels, then detonated them mid-roll. The blast didn't harm the ship, but it created a shifting wake of ionized gas that scrambled the dredgy's line-of-sight plasma coils. They missed every shot again and again. Then Njagu fired one torpedo, just one, not at the ship but at an ice cluster 2 kilometers off. The resulting explosion sent high-velocity shards into the dredgy cutter's sensor mast, tearing it clean off without damaging the hull. She hailed them after that. "Return home and tell them you can't chart our chaos, we design it." The dredgy fled. Back on Earth at the Alexandria Deep Engine, the next phase had begun. Dr. Naomi Zell, architect of the Chaos Protocols, stood before an AI lattice that pulsed with 10,000 active detonative simulations. The goal wasn't destruction, it was communication. They were attempting to encode language through chain reactions, teaching machines to speak in detonative logic. Fractal information patterns expressed not in words or images, but in synchronized flashes and kinetic resonance. They called it the Prometheus thread. The hypothesis, if alien minds thought so differently that translation failed, then perhaps explosion was the universal constant. Light, force, energy, compression, every species understood those at a primal level, so why not use them to speak? It was humanity's great wager, that in the end, amidst the stars and ancient laws and cold precision of galactic politics, it would be their embrace of destruction, not for its own sake but for what came after, that would make them impossible to ignore. And just maybe unforgettable, the Shatter archives burned. Not with fire but with information. Streams of intercepted data, fragments of human field reports, erratic recordings of battlefield behavior, none of it made sense through the lens of established doctrine. That was the problem. The Terrans didn't follow patterns, they made them. One report stood out above all. A battle on Requiem's Gate, a dead world carved with crystalline monoliths dating back to the first galactic cycle. No weapons were allowed there by ancient pact, no technology that could disturb its delicate geometry. It was a sanctuary of sorts where treaties were signed and centuries were remembered. The Terrans sent an anthropologist. But what followed wasn't peace. The Varn delegation was ambushed by an unknown hostile rogue dredgy splinter faction. Laser nets burned through atmosphere and ancient structures began to crack. Defensive weapons were forbidden. Most delegations were helpless. But not the Terrans. From the sands, the human scholar pulled what should have been a geological sensor. Instead, it was a miniature detonator pack, part of a redundant safety network designed to trigger terrain shifts for controlled excavation. The human reconfigured it mid-run, buried the core beneath a fault line, and exploded sideways, collapsing part of the monolith's base into a defensive wedge. He didn't fight back, he reshaped the battlefield itself. The dredgy withdrew, unable to anticipate how stone had become shield, how detonation had become defense. Afterward, the scholar apologized. His name was Dr. Nolan Ride, his statement was archived. The structure would have collapsed if the impact had continued. We didn't destroy it. We redirected its collapse into a new form. The explosion saved your monument. The Varn called it blasphemy. The Shatter called it blasphemy. The Maleks called it impossible. But none could deny the truth. The Terrans hadn't defied the laws of the place. They'd understood them differently. In deep orbit over Tarsis V, a human fleet drilled for Operation Ember Fold. The system's star was nearing nova phase, and the Varn had written it off as a forbidden zone. No species dared enter. The energy fluctuations alone would unmake any conventional engine drive. But humans didn't need conventional anymore. Admiral Wen Zhao stood aboard the ISS Peregrine's wreck, her flagship, while engineers strapped detonation capsules to magnetic hull strips. It wasn't a weapon, it was navigation. Every burst would punch spacetime in microlayers, like pushing a ship through overlapping doors that only existed for milliseconds. It was madness. It was genius. "What if one of the blasts reflects wrong?" asked her XO. "Then we'll know what dying in the name of science feels like," she said without flinching. The fleet dove into the corona. The explosions didn't destroy, they stitched. One after another, precise bursts danced across the hulls, guiding them along a corridor of shockwaves too unstable for any AI to predict. Human instinct, combined with carefully mapped detonation logic, became the key. They crossed the nova boundary and came out alive. And when they returned, they didn't return with weapons. They returned with star matter. Harvested, stable, and sealed. Something no one had ever retrieved from a dying sun. Not because it was impossible. Because no one had ever detonated the way through it. Meanwhile, beneath the crust of Europa's inner sea, a Terran black site known as Project Whisperflare conducted seismic experiments. The goal: use harmonic detonations to create communication relays through otherwise impossible terrain: ice, liquid, stone, metal, even vacuum-exposed strata. Dr. Kessun, head of the project, explained it to the visiting Concord observer with unapologetic clarity. "We're building a language made from controlled destruction. You listen to the silences between the explosions and encode meaning into them." The observer blinked, uncomprehending. "You are weaponizing absence." "No," Kessun said, "we're weaponizing understanding." It wasn't just about warfare anymore. Humanity was using controlled chaos to see. To know. To connect. In ways the galaxy had never imagined. The Council of the Varn fractured for the first time in recorded millennia. Two sects emerged. The preservationists believed humanity was a threat not just to peace, but to the very fabric of cosmic balance. They argued for quarantine, suppression, in extreme corners, extermination. But a new sect had risen. The recalibrants. Led by Elder Eros Malik, a Malix thought weaver who once designed pulsar symphonies for temporal forecasting, they saw something else in the Terrans. Not threat. Not chaos. Potential. "They are the child of a violent universe," Eros spoke before the council, his crystalline limbs vibrating with power. "They do not worship entropy, they understand it. They do not fear collapse, they use it to leap forward." "They will break the laws we built," Kral warned. "Perhaps the laws must break," Eros replied, "so new ones can be forged." It was heresy. It was prophecy. It was the beginning of a new schism. The final test of the Prometheus thread was held at the edge of the Abaddon Rift, a chasm in spacetime where even gravity failed to function properly. All known probes failed to report back. Light itself refused to travel in straight lines. The Terrans didn't send probes. They sent detonators. 12 in total, chained, encoded. Each burst created a moment of perfect measurement, a pulse of reality that the rift could not fully absorb. The explosion stitched together an image of what lay within, not just a void, but a doorway. And in its silence, something answered. The Prometheus thread translated the response, not in words, but in patterns. "They see you. You move like stars being born. Chaos is your mother tongue." Earth's team sent one final reply. "Then listen, we have much to say." The doorway in the Abaddon Rift pulsed. Across the distant observatories and relays scattered through Terran space, no conventional instruments could keep up. It wasn't just a gate, it was a frequency, a response. The rift had always been treated as a cosmic malfunction, a defect in reality, but now it reacted to Terran detonative language as if it had been waiting. For the first time, the universe had spoken back. On Earth, the Alexandria Deep Engine parsed the sequence. What came through wasn't an invasion, it wasn't a warning, it was data. A map of systems not marked on any stellar registry, of black holes with no X-ray emissions, of gravitational signatures that followed non-Newtonian rhythm. The rift had memory, and it had opened to Terrans not because of diplomacy or ancient keys, but because their detonations had mimicked its pulse. The Prometheus team sat in stunned silence. They had knocked on the edge of nothing, and the void had replied. At the conquered summit on Ithurian, panic reigned. The Varn declared emergency motion Theta Aleph. The Shatter demanded immediate sanctions on Earth. The Ori sealed their embassies and closed all scent lines. Most saw the activation of the Abaddon Rift as a declaration of war on the natural order. But the recalibrants argued differently. Elder Eros Malek stood before the highest chamber, his crystal form dimmed with exhaustion but unshaken. They did not open it with a weapon, they opened it with understanding born through destruction. They listened to silence and heard pattern. They did not command the rift to open, it answered a language it had never heard spoken. The chamber hissed. Then what are they if not a threat? Kral demanded. Malek didn't answer with philosophy. He raised a memory construct. The projection showed Terran engineers using shock map detonations to construct a stable transit ring inside a gravity well once deemed inescapable. Not for war, not for conquest. To make travel possible to systems the conquered had abandoned as lost causes. The ring blinked active and 5 Terran ships passed through. Not warships. Relief cruisers. Carrying food, medicine, environmental seed packs. To extinct worlds, worlds left behind. They don't bring fire to destroy, Malek whispered, they bring it to rekindle. On the shattered moons of the Gauss Verge, the war changed. The Verge had been contested for decades, a border zone littered with minefields, failed terraforming colonies, and pirate enclaves. No faction could claim it. The gravitational harmonics were too unstable for sustained defense platforms, and no known race could map the drift patterns of its fused moons. Until the humans came. They brought no fleet, just 2 small fireteams, a half-dozen drone rigs, and a ship named Reason in Flame. Their plan: mine the fault lines of the moons, not for destruction but for realignment. They mapped each drifting mass, identified the chaotic orbitals, and placed charges in perfect sequence to nudge the entire verge into a slow spiral that would stabilize over 20 years. No weapons, no occupation. Just controlled detonations to reshape the region's future. It was an act of galactic engineering. And it was irreversible. The pirates fled, the navies fell back, the Verge was no longer contested. It belonged to the Terrans, not through force, but through their willingness to dance with chaos while others stood paralyzed by it. Victor Aaron returned. No longer a sergeant, now a specialist in chaos sequence field deployment. He was stationed on Meshadin 4, a neutral planet on the brink of rebellion. It wasn't his job to kill anyone, it was his job to understand what might collapse and then detonate before it did. He worked with architects, sociologists, ecosystem analysts. Together, they restructured Meshadin's decaying capital using microblasts to redirect river flows, detonate sinkholes before they could destabilize foundations, and break up toxic cloud formations trapped in the upper atmosphere with atmospheric ignition. It was the opposite of conquest. It was surgical intervention on a planetary scale. A culture on the edge had been pulled back not with aid drops or ideology, but with explosive insight. Victor stood above the city one dusk, smoke from a recent blast still curling upward like incense. Children played in the crater below, now turned into an artificial pond. A Meshadani elder approached him. Her robes were dusted in white, the mark of her order. You wage peace like others wage war. He didn't smile. He simply nodded. Then came the summons. Humanity was invited, for the first time, to the Vault of the Nine. No species had entered the vault since the Conquered was formed. It was the deepest sanctum of galactic law, woven into the core of a moon-sized construct orbiting the black star Tethras, a place where reality was weighed, not just discussed. Earth's delegation was small. Admiral Wen Zhao, Dr. Naomi Zell, Governor Alia Rahman, and Victor Aaron. They arrived without armor, without escorts, only with a set of crystalline detonators suspended in anti-grav mesh gifts. When asked what they were, Zhao answered, "History books written in energy." Inside the vault, the walls resonated with the thoughts of 10,000 years. Voices of species long extinct whispered through the latticework. It was there that humanity made its case, not with language but with demonstration. They activated the sequence. Each charge detonated not with force but with pattern, flash, pause, compression, bloom. The vault echoed back the frequency. And then for the first time it added to it. The vault had understood. The vault had replied. No conquered law had accounted for this. No clause existed for a race that could teach the galaxy to think differently by exploding its own assumptions. The vault cast its verdict into the stars. Humanity is not anomaly. Humanity is revelation. In the silence that followed the vault's verdict, no species moved. Not the crystalline fleets of the Maleks, not the cloaked assemblies of the Ori, not even the Varn, whose civilization had not changed its governing structure in over 9,000 cycles. The vault had spoken a declaration that bypassed all politics, all resistance, all doctrine. Humanity had detonated their way into the core of galactic truth. And the stars were listening. The Prometheus array, anchored in 6 systems across Terran space, pulsed with a new rhythm. The detonative language developed by Project Whisperflare had transcended mere communication. It had evolved into a framework, a syntax that alien AIs and biological minds alike could interpret. It wasn't symbolic, it wasn't abstract. It was experiential. You didn't read a Prometheus signal, you felt it in your bones, in the pull of gravity and the hum of force. It told you something was changing without needing to explain how. The first to respond were not ships, but civilizations. The Ori began to use detonative waveforms in their scent-coded laws. The Shatter, once fanatics for rigid order, started experiments with harmonic micro-explosions in their temples, saying it brought them closer to the birth of stars. The Dredgi, despite their pride, opened their xenolinguistic labs to Earth's engineers, co-designing detonators that could be sung into activation. Controlled chaos had become a universal bridge. Not because it erased difference, but because it celebrated it. In chaos, everything left a mark, a signature. And the galaxy had never seen anything leave a mark like humanity. Then came the echoes. Across the outer sectors, deep space telescopes began picking up gravitational reverberations, patterns too refined to be natural, too distant to have originated from any known species. It wasn't just the rift that had been listening. Something else had been listening too. The pulses were coming from a point far beyond the galactic edge. Unreachable. Unthinkable. Until the Terrans proposed the impossible again. The construction of a detonation-threaded bridge, not a wormhole, not a fold gate, but a trail of chained gravitational detonations, set in perfect rhythm, forming a lattice of compression events that could momentarily trick spacetime into stitching itself toward the source. It would take every ounce of Terran explosive design, every piece of Prometheus syntax, every engineer, every physicist, every mad demolitions artist Earth had to offer. The Conquered said it was suicide. The Terrans agreed. And did it anyway. Victor Aaron stood aboard the ISS Black Syllable, the flagship of Operation Reachfire, alongside Governor Raman and Admiral Zhao. The detonation nodes were ready, stretching like beads of light across hundreds of millions of kilometers. One wrong pulse and the cascade would collapse into a black wave. But they had learned to master instability. They had learned to speak in collapse. As the first node fired, Zhao spoke to the crew. This isn't just contact, it isn't conquest. This is what we do. When others retreat from the edge, we ignite it. The sequence began. 1 node, then 5, then 13. The pulses danced. Space bent, time curled inward like a fist. And the stars sang. Through that rupture in known reality, the Terrans passed into a region where geometry broke, where logic failed, and where only resonance held. There they met the architects. Not a species, not in any conventional sense. They were structures of will and waveform. They were old, so old that light from the birth of the first galaxies still echoed through their being. They had no eyes, but they saw the detonative code. They had no voices, but they answered in cascades of force. They had not communicated with the galaxy in 1 billion years, because no one had spoken their language. Until now. Back in the Vault of the Nine, the response from beyond arrived as an echo through every active detonator in the Prometheus array. The architects had spoken, and what they said changed everything. Not a warning, not a threat, but an invitation. Not to dominate, not to assimilate, but to create. To build new laws shaped not by fear of entropy, but by the courage to wield it. And the first to be named a Forgemind in this newborn accord was Earth. Humanity. Not because they were powerful, not because they were wise, but because they had dared to detonate their way through the dark. The galaxy changed after that, not in the way of empires rising and falling, but deeper. At the root, detonative logic was added to the Universal Codex. Children in Ori academies learned the language of silence and shock. Varn architects rebuilt ancient structures with detonative harmonics to stabilize them beyond previous limits. The Shatter wrote new treatises on kinetic theology. Even the cold, unfeeling, conquered bureaucracies revised their articles. One line was added. In controlled chaos, we find clarity. Humanity didn't rule the galaxy. They didn't need to. They had taught it to hear again, to feel again, to see not with old eyes, but with reverberation. And wherever new stars were born, or novas split systems, or ancient machines came alive in the dust of long-dead worlds, there the architects' words remained, carved into the frequencies. They called it destruction, but the humans called it beginning.